right. All right. Well, everyone, welcome to the April meeting of the Salt Lake City R user group. We are so happy to have you. So in this meeting, what we are so happy to have Greg Snow speaking for us. So Greg is a statistician here in Salt Lake City and works for Intermountain Healthcare and also teaches down at BYU. And Greg is going to be sharing with us tools and tips for how to use my personal favorite IDE, and not only because I work for them now, but tools and tips for how to use RStudio the IDE. So I think this will be great and helpful for us. So a few notes before we get started. I think we have a mix of people here who are local to us in our group and who have joined us from far away. But I'm dropping here in the chat a link to our meetup group. So this is our local Salt Lake City, our user group meetup group. So this is how to find our group, to stay up to date with what we're doing. So we're meeting online this month. We're not entirely sure what's happening next month, but we will take it month by month and see what is happening. The other thing I just want to say is that during this particular group, Greg is going to be speaking, and Andrew and I are going to be moderating this group. So as part of we as our user group are supported by and are part of the R consortium. And so I just want to share the R consortium's code of conduct here. So here's a link to the code of conduct. And so we want this group to be professional and welcoming. And so part of what Andrew and I are going to be doing is going to be making sure that happens. So that applies to what happens in chat or anything like that. We are recording this, so I want you all to be aware of that we're recording it, and we usually share in person. We usually record and share the talks on YouTube, and so we plan to do that as well. So you are currently being recorded, and we will share that info on YouTube. I share the recording on YouTube later for those who cannot be here, and I believe that is it of everything. Oh yes. Okay. So during the talk, if you have questions things that will that come up for you during the talk, feel free to type them in chat. We are gonna click mute all so that nobody can unmute themselves during the actual talk. Feel free to type any questions that you have, and either Andrew and I will surface anything that seems like it should be surfaced to Greg during the talk. And also we'll have time for questions at the end, and you can type anything in chat and Andrew and I will help to surface those to Greg. Or there also is a feature where you can click raise your hand, and then we can click to let you speak, and if you would like to ask a question verbally to Greg. So we can do that at the end for questions at the end. And with that, we will get started. So Greg, we are so glad that you're here and able to share and flexible, and so we're looking forward to what you have to share.
Yeah. Thank you. So this is basically tools and tips that I've learned from RStudio over the years. If you don't ever intend on using RStudio, or you know everything there is to know about RStudio, then I don't know why you're here, but you can have a nice nap and still claim to have been at the meeting or something. Hopefully there will be some things here for everybody that it's like, oh, hey, I hadn't thought about that, or at least I hadn't thought about it for a while. I kind of think of this as this quote, though I might be misquoting it. I don't remember where I first saw it, probably a bumper sticker or something. But it was something along the lines of experience is learning from your mistakes. Wisdom is learning from other people's mistakes. So the goal here is to, lay some wisdom on you by letting you learn from things that I learned from experience, and you get to learn from my mistakes going forward. This also comes from kind of this classic question and answer pair. I've been both the questioner and the answerer here. But so sometimes it's like, well, why don't you use this tool or tip here? And the answer is, well, because you have not taught me how to use it yet. So here's my chance to teach you. But also, if at the end you come and say, well, hey, why didn't you cover this tip or this tool? And basically that would be a great topic for a future our users group meeting if you know of several things that I don't cover. So just a few things, or there's quite a few different things I wanted to cover here. But one of the first things is there are a lot of keyboard shortcuts in RStudio, and more than I could ever remember. But luckily, there's a quick reference and a place to do it. So I have lots of screenshots in this presentation, and I will make this presentation available afterwards. I think we have a GitHub page we can put it on. Plus we're over here, so if you want to look at it later and zoom in on these. But here we show, if you go to, in RStudio, you go to Tools, and then there's this Keyboard Shortcuts Help, and there's kind of zooming in on it. You can also do Alt-Shift-Key on Windows. I'm not sure exactly what the key combination is on Mac. They'll be similar, but a slightly different buttons than that. But that brings up this screen where you can see all these different shortcuts. There's also under that same menu a way that you can create your own shortcuts. If you say, oh, I really want this to be this instead, you can go in there and edit it. But I'm just using the defaults as RStudio comes. But if you ever want a reminder of saying, oh, I remember there was a way to do this, but I don't remember the shortcut, you can always bring up this window and look through it. This also is good for just, I have 10 minutes to kill and let's learn something new, and you can go in and look here and say, oh, what does this mean, or what does that do? And it's a good chance to learn some new things. I will not be covering everything on this page. That would be way too long, and wanted to hit just the main ones that I use or find useful. Okay, so the Alt-Shift-K also works there. Okay, so one of the first things I wanted to hit, and these are just kind of in the order that they came to me as I was putting this together, so it's not particular what's most important or least important in that. But one thing that I find very useful as I'm programming in R, and especially using the RStudio IDE, is section headers. And I was trying to think, where did I first learn about these? And I can't remember, but it's one of those things that it's like, how did I ever live without them? So a section header is basically in an R command or a command file is any line that starts with a number sign or hash sign, which means that it's going to be a comment to R, and then it ends with at least 4 in a row of an equal sign, a minus sign, or again the number sign will become a section header. So here are some examples. It doesn't matter how many comment or hash signs you start with, as long as the first thing is 1 and you end up with 4 at the end. Here with the dashes, I've got a lot more than 4. Makes it a little bit more visible, but as long as there's at least 4, it's happy. The equal signs and number signs, you can't mix those. It has to be one or the other of those. They're the final 4, but those become section headers. And why do we care about section headers? Well, they're going to be useful when we talk about the outline panel, the jump to section, and code folding, which are all places that we'll use these and have future slides for those. So the first is the outline panel. So if I've got some code here in the upper right-hand corner of the editor window, so the way I've got things laid out, it's kind of top middle here, but you can see here there's this little thing. It's got like 5 horizontal lines, some of them indented, so you can see a little bit better there. I captured my mouse about to click on it, but if you click on that, that shows the document outline. And so zoomed in, that's this panel on the right here. And so this shows you these things in bold are all the section headers within this sample file that I put together. So you can see here, here I'm defining an R6 progress bar. And so I've got my section header right here. So that matches this one here. And then I've got further down that you can't see here, some of these other things here. And then within these sections, I also have some functions that are defined And that's the other things that are showing up in the outline here. So in this progress bar, this is an R6 class. And so it has some different function definitions. So those get picked up automatically as well. So here's the inc function, the initialize function, and you can see those are all here in these in this. So I can see an overlay outline. And this one down here at the bottom actually has this vertical line next to it. That's actually where my cursor still is. So before taking this screenshot, I was down in that section, but I scrolled up but haven't moved the cursor yet. So that kind of shows me where I currently am. Now, if this were a live session, I could actually click on anything in that outline bar and it would take me to that part in the file. So if you've got a really long file, it's nice to be able to jump ahead to the different sections or jump back to a section, and having those section headers in place are a nice way to say, okay, here I'm doing this, now I want to jump to there or do that. Okay. There's also at the bottom of the editor window, there's this part that shows it's the similar information, but you can also use that to jump. So if you don't want to have the outline pane open, but you can click on that. It shows right now, when I took this screenshot, where it shows inc amount here, that shows that my cursor at the time was inside my definition of the inc function, which is short for increment. But when I click on the little triangles next to it, it pops up this menu that is like the outline. It shows the same things in it, but it shows it wider because this is just a temporary one. As soon as I click on something, it'll go away. But again, I can click on any of the things in here, and it will jump me directly to that position within the file. So if I want to jump down to my simulations, oh, what's the question?
Sorry, I was looking for a good spot. Is there a way to, from Alexander, is there a way to hide comments that aren't meant as headers? They show up as untitled in my outline.
That I don't know. I know if you don't end with the section header thing, then it's just a comment. And I don't think the regular comments show up in the outline. Untitled, I think, is more when you have like an anonymous function, or there could be other things there. But I don't remember comments showing up there, but I haven't looked into that.
I find that it pops up if you have just a line of hash marks, that will show up as an untitled header in the outline. Like old files before I used RStudio, I see that pop up in files where I had headers to denote a block of comments. If you're using a line of comments, then you can't hide it from the outline window, as far as I understand. But a regular comment does not show up in that.
Yeah.
Multiple lines of comments can be collapsed, but don't show up on the outline.
Okay, yeah, good question. Okay, so back here to the jump, so I can click on any of these to jump to function definitions or section headers as well. Okay, with that, with jumping around, it's kind of nice is in this top left corner, there's two arrows. One pointing left goes back to your previous location. The one pointing to the right will, after you go back, will take you back forward again. So those are the options. So if I jump down to look at something and want to go back to where I was, you just click on that back arrow. And then once you've jumped back, you can click forward again. And it's really nice is the back and forward will jump between tabs. So when you have multiple tabs open, and I usually have a lot more tabs than even this open, but you open up a new tab to look at a definition of a function or to look at something there. Clicking on the back arrow will take you back to the previous tab where you were. So, if you pop up something and want to go back, okay, where was I before? That's kind of nice. Those arrows are kind of subtle, so they're kind of easy to miss. So I think they'd been there for quite a while before I noticed them and then said, oh, hey, this is really useful. Okay, so that's that there. Okay. Another nice thing as things get really, really long is what's called code folding. You can fold sections based on the section headers, function definitions. If clauses, loops, sections and code blocks in RMD files, and there are probably some other things you can fold as well. But for folding, you look for triangles on the left. So I've highlighted the little triangles here in this sample function. So you won't see the red circles, but the little triangles within them are what means I can fold that section. So basically here, this is a sim function. This if clause is looking to see if my X variable already has a column that's all ones, and if my option is for the intercept, and I say, well, I want to look at my code without that. This is only one line, but when I click on that triangle, now the body gets hidden under just this little blue button. So that, if that had been 20 lines and I wanted to see, well, what comes before and after, and ignore those lines, that's a nice folding there. If I click on the one up next to the else, then that whole else clause gets folded. Clicking next to the if, and so now you can see, here I'm dealing with, if in this function, if no X variable is passed in, then I do something, else I do something. But now I can see, the body of my function with, all this stuff dealing with the missing X is been made smaller, so it's easier to see these different parts closer together without having to scroll. I can fold up the whole function definition, and I can even fold here, clicking next to the section header, I can fold a whole section so I can see things easier there. To unfold, you can either click on the little triangle again, or that blue button that replaces whatever you have just folded. Clicking either of those will unfold that. You can also go to the edit menu and fold an arbitrary selection just by doing edit, folding, collapse. So if it's not one of those specified sections, using the edit menu, there's also fold all and expand all options. Folding doesn't, it's just your current session. So if you start a new session, anything that was folded is now expanded back out. But you can, again, fold things to make it easier to read, long functions, long definitions, hide parts you're not dealing with right now. So that's another nice use there. Okay. Another thing I realized recently is the value of setting the file type. So in a, so this is a .r file. So RStudio by default has as an R script. And if in the editor window, if you look in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see it says R script. This is an R script that looks like that. But I have, as part of my R script, I have a string here that has some SQL. I have another string that has some C++ in it that I can pass to other functions to do some stuff. But while I'm editing these, I might want to temporarily say, I'd like the highlighting for a SQL instead. So if I click on the little triangles next to where it says R script, it brings up the menu, and so I can choose SQL, and it will temporarily treat this this window as if this were a SQL file instead of a .r file. And so now you can see everything within my string, the highlighting and indenting and all of that is following the SQL rules instead of the R rules. And if I do that again and this time choose C++, now I've got the highlighting in my C++ code. But the SQL example is back to looking boring because it's not highlighted, because it doesn't know how to highlight those in C++ mode. I can also switch to something like, if I have stand code in line, it'll highlight my stand code within this string. And then at the end, I'm going to switch this back to a .r file. Okay. My next topic wanted to hit on was rerunning code. And so, maybe unlike me, you write your code. What?
Before you push on,
question
about designating subsections of files as code. Julia mentioned that it is possible with Markdown in chunks, but it is not possible in a file to just highlight a string and designate that as stan, correct?
That's my understanding, yeah. If you're doing a Markdown file, you can designate different blocks different ways, and I think the editor is good enough to mostly figure that out and highlight things appropriately. But this is just a .r file. It's not a markdown file that we're looking at right now. So it's an all or nothing, and so I just have to, I can change it while I'm working on just one part. So that's highlighted, and then I'll switch it back to an R script for looking at the whole thing. Okay. So, you know, if you're perfect at coding and know everything in that, you might run your code once and then not have to go back. For me, I'll often run a block of code and then realize something I want to change, change one a little bit, and then want to rerun that block of code. So that's common there. There's a button that's not labeled with anything. It's got a couple of arrows on it, but it's rerun the previous block. And so to kind of show using this, so here I have a block of code that does a simulation. It creates a progress bar, replicates this simulation 1,000 times, extracts the p-values, does a histogram, and calculates a proportion here for me, all in this block. So I can highlight this, click on the run button, or control enter on Windows will run that for me. But after I run that, I look and I say, okay, you know, those were some nice results, but it didn't give me quite what I wanted. So that was a sample size of 500. And so I'm going to change that now to 750, try it with a new sample size of 750. Now I want to rerun that whole block of code, but rather than having to highlight everything, is this button between the run button and the source button is the rerun the previous code region. So if I click on that, RStudio is smart enough to figure out, okay, what block of code did I just run and then edit, and without having to reselect it, it can it will run that same exact block of code for me. If you add on to the end of the code, it will even do some expanding, but that's a little bit tricky in is it really expanding or not. But if you do any editing within where the block was, even if you add in another 10 lines of code, it will still, you know, run from where I originally had it highlighted going forward. Okay. We saw kind of jumping around a little bit within the same file, but there are some tools that help us jump between files, both help and the definitions. So if you do control period or control dot, that'll bring up a dialog box that you can enter the name of a function. And then it will show matching functions from files in the same directory package or built-in R functions. And then the one that you select will jump to that definition, opening the file if you need to. If you're on a function name that has help for it, pressing F1 while on the function name will open the help page. That one I knew for a while, but you know, I usually just type question mark in the name there. But F2 will actually take you to the source code for the function. And that can be your own functions defined, you know, in files in that same folder, or that can also be the built-in R functions. So to show to this here, so here I've clicked on Control plus, and here's my go to file function, and I've typed in simfun. I'm not very good at coming up with creative names for my functions. So as you can see, I've named a bunch of things simfun, but now I can go through and I can look and find which one do I want. And when I click on one of those, it opens up this file for me. So here was a while back, I did a presentation on simulation for power, and this is the code from that. So it takes me to where that simfun was defined. If I'm within my sample file here, and I'm just here, I have the cursor anywhere along the simfun. So it can be at the beginning, the end, anywhere in between. Now if I hit F2, it jumps, in this case, it was the earlier in the same file. So it just scrolls the file up to where I defined simfun. So I can look at that and say, oh yeah, this is what simfun1 does. Then I can click back to go back to where I was before. And then if I get here, so I'm on the mean function, you know, if I hit F1, it would bring up help for mean. But if I hit F2, Then it jumps to here. Now, mean itself isn't a very exciting function to look at because it's a generic function that has this use method. But a couple of things to look at here is you can see at the top right, it says read only. So it opened a read only window so I can see the definition. I can't edit what mean does, but I could copy and paste from here. I can search within the function, but then it has some other information here. So it's the mean function. It tells me it's in the base package, but then there's a little triangle here that I click on, and it says, well, and here's all the different methods that this might dispatch to. So mean itself isn't very interesting, but I want to now look at the code for mean.default. So I can select that. Now here is the definition of that function, which could be more interesting. Again, I can search in this, I could copy and paste, I can just look at it and close it, whatever. I can close this, and then again, I can use that left pointing arrow to go back to where I was before. Okay. Another fun little feature is popping out panes. And again, this is one of those things where I wished for this functionality without realizing it was there. It's like I keep wanting to copy from one script file to another. It's kind of a pain to highlight and copy, and then have to click on the other tab to get in the other one and then paste. So pop out panes is kind of nice, to where you can have multiple editor windows open and visible at the same time by doing what's called popping them out. So it's this little button here in the top. It looks kind of like there's a window there, and then it has a little arrow pointing up and to the right. And when you hover over it, you get this show in new window. But that pops it out. So with this example file, after clicking on that, it's a separate window here that I can click and drag and move to another location. You can pop out as many panes as you want. So if you do too many, that can get really confusing. Instead of having tabs, you have all these panes. But if you pop out a pane and then you pop out another pane, you can drag on the tabs and move it between your panes. So you could have your main RStudio session and also another window that just has 3 or 4 tabs of things you're editing, and move things between those. Another nice thing, I know how to do this on Windows. I would hope Mac can do something similar. But if on Windows, if you hold down the Windows key, it has a little Windows logo on it, the 4 little rectangles, and then you press the left or right button, it'll take the current window and have it take up half of the current monitor. And if you keep pressing the same button again, it will rotate between that to where, if you click it, right once, it'll put in the right side of your rightmost monitor. Left once will put on the left side of your leftmost monitor. So if you have multiple monitors, you can get the outsides, but if you click right like 3 times, it'll rotate through different places so that you could have, including the left side of the right monitor and the right side of the left monitor. So you could use that to position, 4 different edit panes, each taking up half a monitor, for wanting to do some comparing or copying and pasting or different things with that. So that's really nice when you want to compare between 2 script files, or you want to even copy and paste from, it's like, okay, in this project I did something like this, I want to copy and paste. And so it's really nice to copy in one and paste in the other without having to switching between the tabs, doing that. So popping out panes is nice. Okay, a couple of things that are more that are nice for programming is rename in scope. So here I've just created this nice little temporary function, and its function is variable of x. One of the first things I do is I define y as a function of x, and then through the rest of the function I'm using y here and there. But then I decide that y is really not a very good name. It's not descriptive, and it's not really doing here. And so I want to change all of my y's into something else. So here, where I define y at the top of the function, I've highlighted the y definition, and then I go to the code menu and come down to rename in scope. There is the shortcut there, Control-Alt-Shift-M, and I think it's easier to find the menu than to try and remember that. But if it's something you're going to use a lot, you might be worth memorizing. But if I do rename in scope, what that does is it selects all of the Y's within the function scope. But you can see this Y that I defined up here, and the Y used out here aren't selected. They're not highlighted. It's smart enough to figure out that, oh, I'm just renaming within this function definition, whatever my current scope is. And then if I start typing a new name, it will replace it in every place. So here I've typed it, and now I'm calling it non-neg x because this is referring to, taking my x variable and saying, okay, first are any of them, non-positive? Are they negative? And then I create an absolute value. So I've got my non-negative versions of x that I can use down here. So everywhere that I had a y with, one step, I've replaced all of them. And that's a little bit nicer than having to do the, I could do that with a search and replace, but search and replace would have also tried to replace this one here and this one here. I also have this y2 variable that didn't get selected. Is this tool is smart enough to figure out and say, oh, this is a different variable, so this one shouldn't be replaced either. So I can just rename within the scope of a function, or whatever scope I've defined. I can rename there. You do need it. It only works when you've highlighted the first definition of the function of the variable up here. So you create up here. If I'd selected y down here, then that doesn't work. But where I've defined something, everything after that, it will work on that. Okay. Another really nice thing, this is something I used to use in Emacs all the time, and I really missed when I started using RStudio more than Emacs. I don't really use Emacs anymore, but then I learned I could do this in RStudio, and it's like, yes, hallelujah, this is great. And this is basically selecting a rectangle instead of all the lines. And so basically, if you hold down the Alt key, again, that's the Windows, it's probably Command or something else in Mac. Hopefully that shortcut screen will have that, or you can experiment and try. But I'll do a rectangular editing. So here, I've got some code that I ran, use cbind to make a matrix. Then in the command window, I copied from the command window the results over here to edit, because I'm going to send them to a client now. And so I've got this data here. I just put some quotes at the top and the bottom, just so the RStudio is going to say, hey, this is a string, and not give me all the red squiggly errors of this isn't legitimate R code. But here what I did is I started here, hold down Alt, and then click and drag over here. And so what selected was a rectangular shape. Without holding down Alt, it would have selected this whole line, basically from here to here, but all the lines in between. With just this selected, I can hit delete and get rid of all of that, shift everything to the left, or I can type and replace that with something. So here I typed the word group, and then I can go in and by hand add in the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now I've decided I printed out to too many decimal places, and I want this format a little bit different. So again, hold down Alt here, click and drag, and you can see it as it expands the selection. So it's just that rectangle, and here I replace it with a space and a parenthesis to put some parentheses here so I can do some more editing. So now I'm going to go and do the next part, and I skipped over a couple steps here. But I could have done each of those line by line, but this is kind of a nice way to grab a whole rectangle and replace it all at once. You can also, if you've selected a rectangle, you start typing, it'll add that to all of those lines at once. So sometimes you've got something where, a rectangle makes sense. Have a bunch of things that are, you've lined up nicely, and you want to change the name of a variable where it's all lined up. You can do the rectangular select and just type in the new name. So that can be nice there. Okay. Also with coding or turning stuff in there, there's the extract variable and extract function functionality. So here to explain it, I've just started off with here, I've got my, multiply nested function calls code to do a geometric mean. So one way to do the geometric mean, you take the log of all your x variables, take the mean of the logs, and then take the exponential of that. This is short enough that this is still somewhat readable, but if I start adding in options and other stuff, these functions like this, while they work and R can understand them and RStudio can understand them, it's hard for people to do that. So I look at this and I say, okay, how can I change this to make this more readable? And so the first thing I'm going to do is going to take kind of my innermost piece here, the log of x, and I'm going to highlight that. And then I go to code, and there's this extract variable option. When I choose that, it pops up and says, okay, I want to replace some code with a variable. So what should my variable name be? So being the non-creative person I am here, I'm going to call it log x because that's descriptive. It is the log of x. And when I click OK, it modifies things this way. So now it replaced my code that was in here with the variable name, and just above it, it creates a new row where it has the code that I had before and assigns that to this new variable log x. Okay, I could have done that by hand. I could have copied and pasted on my own, but this was kind of a nice taking 3 or 4 steps down to 1 step. I can do it again. I highlight mean of log x. Again, select that. I'm going to do MLX as my name here. And so it pops it out to put that in the right position. And so now I've taken, 3 function calls that were all on one line. And now I've created temporary variables, and it's on 3 lines to make it a little bit more readable. Right now, it only does it here. I'm hoping that sometime in the future, hint Julia, that they'll also do this with the Magrider pipe, that there might be an option that you could do that same highlighting and it would, create Magrider pipes here. But last I checked, it doesn't do that yet. Now I can take those 3 lines of code and I say, hey, I'm going to probably run this some more times. So it's probably, I'm going to run this enough times, I should make a function definition out of this. So I could, type function up here and first curly bracket and my other curly bracket and then indent everything. Or I can highlight the 3 lines that I want to be the body of my function. And then I'm going to choose the extract function option from the code menu. It's going to ask me for the name of the function. This calculates the geometric mean, so I'm going to call it gmean. And when I click OK, it automatically adds in the function, assigns it to the name I specified, puts in the curly brackets, adds some indenting, and it also looked through here and said, oh, x was not defined anywhere within the code that I had highlighted, so it must be an argument to the function. Log x and MLX were defined, so they're not function arguments. So it's created my basic function structure here that I can now go in and edit and add more things to or do whatever else I want with. But it's kind of a nice step of saying I've got some lines of code I want to turn into a function. It saves a few keystrokes and is a little bit nicer to have RStudio do this for me. I could have done that by hand, but it's a nice little feature there. Okay. Another thing that I run into, especially when my code starts getting really, really long, is saying it's like, okay, what scope am I in? Where is my matching parenthesis or curly bracket to this? When things are all on the same screen, if you position it right, it'll highlight a matching parenthesis or brace or bracket. But if it's off the screen, that's harder to see and scrolling through. So this expand selection is kind of a nice little thing here, is Control Shift and the up arrow will expand, will select basically your current scope. Pressing it again expands the selection to the enclosing scope. You can go the other way by doing the Control Shift and down arrow. So just an example again here. So here my cursor is on this line here in my code. And so if I do Control Shift up arrow, then it highlights everything within those curly brackets. So now I can see, okay, that's the whole scope of what that was. Now, if like my cursor had actually been here, it would have just highlighted within these parentheses. If it would have been here, it would have been within these curly brackets. So it's pretty smart at figuring out current scopes. And this is a lot more visible as to what brackets are matching, is I didn't have to first move to a bracket. It said from anywhere in here, and the highlighting makes it a lot more clear. And if this had been a long enough scope that it wasn't all on the screen at the same time, this is a little bit nicer for scrolling then. If I hit, with this selected, I hit Control Shift up again, and then now you see it includes the curly brackets. Before it didn't. I do it another time, and now it jumps out, and so it's now the whole if clause. And if I keep going, it'll highlight the whole function definition and that going down. So click Control Shift down, arrow will kind of shrink back to where I was, so I can go back to the exact position that I was at before. Okay. Another topic. Look at my time here. So I think this is one of my last ones here. So a common problem that I run into is that I'll do, it's like, oh, I remember I did a project where I used this function or this package or used something, and I want to see what I did and possibly copy it again into my current project, but I don't remember what I named the script file, or might not even be where that was. Well, the solution is the Find in Files under the Edit menu. So you choose Edit, Find in Files, pops up this little thing here. So here I can type in, so I want to see where I've used the fortune function. I choose which folder I want it to start. It'll search that folder and all the folders underneath that folder. And then I can also say what types of files. So common R source files, so R, RNW, RMD, RHTML, RD, even C++, or just R scripts, or I can have it search every file. I mostly use those two center ones there. But then it pops up, this is in a tab, the same window as your console, but this searched through this folder and looked in all those different files within the folder looking for where fortune was used. So in this databasics.r, line 101, I called fortune with the argument 312. Go through all of these. Now if I click or double click on one of those, it will open the file appropriately. So here I came down and I clicked on Fortune Yoda. So it opened over on the left here the file. So in this case, it's fortunes.rmd. And it took me right to where I call the fortune function with the argument Yoda here. And so here we can see the classic fortune here of this is R, there is no if, only how. And so I can enjoy that. Now, this I want something simple, but I could do that for something else. But I can actually do some command history from the shell as well. So in the console window, if I just hit the up arrow, it shows my most previous command up again, the command before that. But this is a nice thing. If I start typing here, so in this case, I do fit in my assignment arrow. Now, if I hold down Control and do the up arrow, I get this menu of all the things here. So this might have been, 10 commands back, 20 commands back, that I know that I created this fit variable. And so it shows me all the different things I've done in my history that start with fit gets. And I can choose one of those. And when I click on one of those, it gives me the command there. It doesn't run it yet, but it puts it so that now I can start editing that to run it again, or I can just hit enter and run it again. If I need more, there's the whole command history window. So this just shows the commands that I had run recently in this session, and actually went into some previous sessions, I think. But up here, I've got the magnifying glass. I can search in there. So if I search for GLM, this is more flexible in that the control up arrow only does a starts with. This looks for all the cases where I've done GLM, and it shows me just the line with GLM. But now I've got these arrows, right arrows over on the right side. If I click on one of those, it says show this in context. So it shows the whole history here of, so here's my summary GLM command, but here's the commands that were on the other side of that. I can select multiple lines or just that line or whatever, and I can copy it either to the console or to my currently open source document. So if I did some commands and I say I need to put this into a script so I remember what I did next week when the client asks me about it, I can copy it to a script here or to the console to edit and run again. Okay. Those are ones I wanted to hit, and my time's about up. So here's some other topics that I thought could be of interest, but I knew we wouldn't have a lot of time here. But RStudio projects are useful. What you can do with the files pane. You can create your own custom code snippets that you can populate things with. Using R notebooks is really nice. We could probably have a whole one of these presentations just on debugging in RStudio. It's not really specifically to RStudio, but the diff-R and diff-obj packages are nice for examining differences. I'll go back to a project and I'll see 2 different R files, and it's like, okay, these look similar. What's the difference between them? Using the terminal and using database connections are all some nice things that have been added to RStudio in the last few years that have some nice functionality to them. So those are some other things that you might be interested in looking up as well. That's my presentation. So I guess it's time if anybody has any questions that they haven't already asked, or if Andrew or Julia wants to ask the questions that they thought were best from the chat.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, Greg. That's so great. I especially like some of those things you hit on, I have personally found so useful, like being able to search my history versus like hitting the up arrow 1 zillion times, like where was that thing that I did, you know, and all those things. That was all really great. Let's see. Does anybody have a question that they would like to ask about any of the topics that we covered here about using RStudio in these different ways? I think it's under more, I think, if you in the participants pane, so the way that you raise your hand, and then you click more.
Alex, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry about that. So Greg, I was kind of curious, right at the end, you sort of mentioned the use of projects and a few other things. One thing that I struggle with is understanding the opportunities that RStudio offers for version control. I'm pretty novice about Git. I know that that's kind of the standard and I'm trying to explore that, but is there anything on this side of Git that can help us with some version control that you use or anything like that?
I haven't done so much with version control, other than the real basics of, I'll have a script and I'll say, okay, I want to do something similar, but I want to change this. And so I'll just, do the save as and save a copy and call it, script2.r instead of script1.r. And
Sure.
that's when I need the difference to find out what the difference between those are. I've been playing around a little bit with the, Git and Subversion as well. I've started using it for some of my packages to make that a little bit easier for the packages that I create and share. But I'm still very much on the novice side on that as well. But it is nice to.
Yeah, I use Git. I use the Git's the Git GUI support in RStudio. I use a mix of like command line Git stuff and the Git like pane in RStudio. And I think the RStudio like within the IDE support for for Git is very helpful. The stuff that I find myself depending on the most is like the visual representations of the diffs, like when I go to compare, or like I'm about to push something up that is different and like highlighting what exactly are the things that I've changed, which files have changed. That stuff is all really helpful. I'm gonna the thing I like the best for getting started is this resource from Jenny Bryan called Happy Git with R. I'm going to, thank you. It's the same thing that was just shared by this other person who has joined us. It is, I think, really great for getting started. And it's like Git for our users with like an RStudio focus.
The next question from Russ Thomas: is there an easy way to grab a line, remove it, and paste elsewhere in file similar to YY command in V? Greg, I'd be happy to take that question if you don't.
Well, I know if you just want to move it a few lines, there's actually, I think it's if you hold Alt and the up or down arrow, it'll actually move the current line up or down one line. So if you just want to move it up one or down one or up 3 or 4, you know, hold Alt and do that. It's a quick way to just move a line. But no, I'd be happy for Andrew to tell us a you know, a quick copy or quick cut and paste for moving further.
That's where I was going to go. There is also a feature of duplicating a line or a section of code, which I find very useful. I'm not sure if it's the default shortcut. I have it to Control D. I'm not sure if that's the default though, so you'll have to check on your keyboard shortcuts, but you can duplicate lines down and then move them around with the Alt. And if you highlight a section and then Alt move it, it will move several lines at once, which within a file is great. Otherwise, you can also drag and drop sometimes, but that's you have to be really careful with that because that depends on the operating system.
So I came to RStudio as like an Emacs user, not a Vim user, but like a lot of my muscle memory Emacs stuff works, like Control K for taking stuff into the buffer, and then like Control Y to like take it off of the buffer. So if you're it's not so helpful if you're a Vim user, but if you like came from Emacs, a lot of the stuff you have in muscle memory just works.
It is definitely worthwhile to everyone to spend a little bit of time and look through what's available in the keyboard shortcuts. Just be careful that there are multiple components, and shortcuts in one component can override the shortcuts in another component.
What do you mean by component?
Versus the editor,
like the panes, like the
there are a couple that I have found that are that will have the same thing, and it will say this is the one that takes priority.
Gotcha. Nice. All right. Well, does anybody else have another question? Awesome. Okay, so that's the question. Is it to the question here is about hosting your Git repos. Where should you host them on the same place versus having them distributed across your system? So my Git repos, so like your Git repo lives in a folder, and my Git repos are in different places, like on my computer. Like I don't have them all in one folder. Like I have on my like local computer, I have a folder that has, say, open source work, and a folder that has you know, day job work, and so like a folder will have an R project which has a Git repo associated with it. Like that's sort of the mental model, is like a like a folder, it has a Git repo associated with it, which has like an R project. Nice. All right. So we are coming up to the end of the hour. I sure appreciate you all coming. We do have a meeting scheduled for next month. I'm excited about it. It's about like different kinds of regression other than logistic and linear regression, like other kinds of regression for when your data is not appropriate for either of those two kinds. I don't think Abby is here today, but Abby is going to be speaking. So you can keep an eye on that. Oh, Abby is here. Hooray. Abby is going to be speaking. I'm very excited. Do you want to say hi, Abby? Are you unmutable, or I don't know. Anyway.
I'm here. Hi.
Hey, yay! Abby is speaking next month. We'll see if we are meeting in person or if we're going to do another online setup like this, and we're just going to take it a month at a time. If you are a local Salt Lake person and you are interested in presenting a topic, we would love to hear from you. Please get in touch with Andrew or me. We would love to if you have a topic or a package you've learned to use, or a project you've done in your research or for your job, we would love to hear about it. You can keep in touch with us on our meetup page, and we have links to GitHub and all that. And I think that is about it. Any final thoughts, Greg or Andrew?
No, thank you for
Thanks for being here.
attending.
Yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and we will see you next time.